Paramedics, firefighters, cops, what is the weirdest thing you've come across during a call? I'm a volunteer firefighter in South Texas, and one of my weirdest calls has to be something that happened just a few months ago. We receive a page saying the local naval air station has a plane down, requesting tanker and manpower assistance. We respond with about 6 guys in our tanker and our command truck. We get to the NAS, drive out to the brush behind the runways, and see 2 small grass fires as well as some smoldering wreckage of a naval T-45 trainer. We're told to stay by our trucks until the wreckage is cleared by the NAS firefighters, so we just stand around, bullshitting. My lieutenant and I are standing there when we see one of the naval firefighters hauling butt around the front of our truck, yelling, "Climb up, get off the ground." We don't question the guy and almost vault on top of our truck. I look over the side, not knowing what to expect, and see a freaking wild pig running towards the truck. She hits the side, bounces back a little, snorts, and runs off into the brush, where we now notice a pack of piglets coming around her, then following deeper in. Then we look at the NAS guy, and he just shrugs, says, "I don't know what set her off, but she charged me." Then he just got back down and went about his business, while we stand there, looking at each other, laughing our asses off. No time to explain. Working a shift with an ambulance crew, I'm not an EMT, was there for a company building a product to help EMTs and dispatchers to communicate. Went to a call about intense abdominal pains. Get to the apartment, knock, we can hear the guy yelling from deep in the apartment, saying "busted down," so the EMTs did break it open. We go in, find a guy, fully clothed, lying on his bed in a fetal position moaning. The EMTs start taking his vitals. He's breathing. Pulse is fast, but strong. Temperature is a little up, but nothing. And they fire off the questions about food, fricking, injuries in the past, anything at all that could result in abdominal pains. And one of them is trying to feel his gut, hits something and just turns pale. Says, "This guy's got a huge cyst or something. It's hard as a rock, and it's inflamed. Better roll." So they throw him on the gurney, and out we go. I'm audio taping the whole conversation back to dispatch as we run down the hall. We load up and head. 2 minutes into the trip, the guy screams and jerks, then faints. One of the EMTs noticed a big dark wet spot on the guy's butt, so they start cutting away his trousers. We arrives just as they clear away enough to see he's bleeding anally. I go in with the team and start the prep work, but the bleeding is getting worse. So finally into surgery, where they removed a softball and a baseball from his Apparently, he lubed up, put the baseball in a condom, enjoyed it, so went bigger, and got the softball in, but then the cramps began. My mom's a paramedic and dinner conversations are usually interesting. She had one partner that just seemed to attract all the crazy calls. We'll call him Pat. Both of these happened while she was riding with him. They get a call for a woman in labor, not quite full term, but close. When they get there, she's already spread out, saying she has to push. They never even had a chance to get her on a stretcher. Delivering babies isn't that unusual for paramedics, but this didn't go as planned. After 5 or so minutes of straining and groaning and pushing with my mom at her head and her partner on the business end, they had a successful delivery of an approximately 10-pound turd right into Pat's hands. Seems she'd been constipated for ages and not done anything about it. When the time finally came, she mistook the stomach cramps for labor. Another day, another call. They end up in the projects with an overweight woman complaining of chest pains. Usually when there's a chest pain call, the patient is not up and walking around and cussing at everyone thing in sight. This woman was doing all of the above, shirtless. She kept loudly repeating that her chest hurt while my mom and Pat asked her to let them take her vitals and to explain where the pain was. Eventually the woman had enough of them not understanding her and walked up to Pat. She screamed, "I said my chest hurts," picked up her huge saggy breasts and flopped them into Pat's hands. She wasn't having heart pains, she was having literal chest pains. Poor Pat. There's more, always, but those are my favorites of the funny calls. Getting an absolutely ridiculous run every now and then really helps them deal with some of the horrible things they face. Please, sir, I want some more. This occurred in a hospital, but in any case, my ex-girlfriend had a friend who was a nurse at a local hospital. One day, ex-GF suggests we go to the hospital to visit her friend, knowing that this particular hospital has absolutely stunning French fries available in their cafeteria for bargain basement prices. I agree. Upon arrival, we meet nurse friend, who looks a little upset. I purchase my delicious fries, we sit down, and XGF asks NF why she looks unhappy. NF relays the following story. A woman had recently needed surgery to remove her appendix. They had sewn her back up and sent her on her merry way. A few days later, she was back, complaining that her stitches had opened up. NF suggests to XGF and I that this is not unusual, given that the patient was overweight. Current French fry consumption ability above par. All systems go for increased cholesterol. The doctor had sewn her back up, and once again, the patient departed. The next day, she came back. Her stitches had opened up again. Odd, but still not unexplainable. NF suggests to the patient that she avoid any unnecessary activity. They sew her up again, and she leaves. Current French fry consumption ability average. Warily chewing while waiting for multiple shoes to drop. That day, prior to our arrival, this woman had come back in. Same issue. The stitches have pulled themselves out again, as this is the fourth time she has to be sewn up. The doctor says, look, you're doing something wrong here. What are you doing? Are you pulling these out on purpose? Patient gets super defensive. Doctor knows something is up. Patient starts to cry. They will not let her leave until she tells them what is happening. At this point, they bring in NF, who is pretty much a 22-year-old Mother Teresa. She is exactly the type of person whom I would want as a nurse. She can coax anything out of anyone. Ready for this? NF, 22MT, manages to get this patient to admit that it is not in fact her whom is pulling the stitches out, but her fiancé. This complete sociopath has convinced the patient to allow him to penetrate her, physically the hole in her belly where the doctor had removed her appendix. Apparently, this was not a painful event for the patient, even though some freaking nut was railing her in the guts. They made her promise not to have the stitches removed again prior to sending her out. Current French fry consumption ability. The plane has crashed into the mountain. We're done here. From what I gather, they did not have to restitch her again. TL. DR. Gutfriker. You don't get to talk anymore. You're done for the day. Holy goddamn crap. When I was an EMT, I responded to call where a hobo was hit by a train. He was scattered over the course of about 2 miles. I came across a shirt filled full of remains when I asked for a hand. The evil bastards I worked with gave me the guy's arm from the elbow down. My uncle was an EMT in a small redneck southern town. My favorite story is a man who got drunk and fell down the stairs of a bar, breaking his legs in the process. They had to cut his pants off to get to the injury, and when they took them off, they found a cucumber taped to the side of his thigh. I asked my uncle what he did about it and he said they just left it there so when he sobered up, he'd find himself in a hospital bed with 2 legs in a cast and a cucumber rotting on his thigh. Similar story. My mom was a nurse at a hospital in the Chicagoland area. One day an old man came in because he had lost circulation to his leg. So they cut off his pants and they found a cucumber tied to his leg. Apparently he had been at a senior's ball and wanted to make himself appear more apt. Guy stuck at the top of a tree trying to rescue a kitten. Cats don't get stuck in trees, people do. The best part was the burly sanitation worker rubbing it in, asking him if he ever saw a kitten skeleton up in a tree. You see their skeleton under the tree where they fell after a week in a tree. I am not a cop. However, one of my good buddies works in the West Valley division of the LAPD. You know the movie Clueless? He patrols the area near where Alicia Silverstone gets robbed in the movie. In Idaho, him and his partner were driving around when they got a 5150 call, otherwise known as a crazy person on the loose. However, the person loose so much as it was their bowels. A 50-year-old man was sitting on a ledge and crapping over the other side. His pants were nowhere to be found. So my buddy and his partner get there and they approach the man. It smells freaking terrible, but they still begin to talk to the man. The man seemed to be a bit hungover. He had been probably drinking during the day and got dehydrated. He tried to explain to them who he was, but nothing was coherent. My buddy and his partner didn't know what to do. They didn't really have the means to transport a man with crap running down his legs. My buddy's partner had a good idea. They approached the man. "Sir, how are you feeling?" "Wah. My head hurts." "You hear that? His head hurts. Call 911. My buddy looked astonished. He radioed for an ambulance, and one had arrived in a couple short minutes. The cop explained to the paramedics that the man was severely dehydrated, which caused his bowels to evacuate, not that he was just super hungover. So that is how my buddy and his partner got out of schlepping a crazy man covered in poo back to the station. D. Good call. This deserves more. My former art teacher used to work in the forest service and would tell us stories about funny weird crap that happened. I still doubt the validity of this, but he had no reason to lie and swears by it. There were firemen out in the middle of nowhere basically fighting a forest fire, Arizona, or brush fire. There wasn't any real danger to people because of how remote this location was. Whether this happened on break or away from the fire he didn't specify, or I have forgotten. But off in the distance they saw a figure, a brightly colored figure walking calmly. As they squinted and started to pursue the figure, they realized there was a fully dressed and face-painted clown out in the middle of nowhere, no campgrounds, no houses for miles, and he had nothing on him, at least visible. Big bag for basic survival. He was just calmly walking alone in the middle of the forest. While they started to get closer but still fighting through the brush, the clown saw he was being followed and evaded them, and was never seen again. No one had heard anything or just kept it as a secret. TLDR. Former Forest Service worker and fireman saw a random clown strolling through the middle of a remote forest near a fire. He probably freaking lit it. I had a patient one time drink a whole gallon of Tide laundry detergent in an effort to kill Satan's baby that I've been pregnant with for 2 years. I was able to keep my composure the whole time we were taking her to the hospital, but every time she started talking, you'd see bubbles in her mouth. I held my composure through that, but then she vomited, and that's when I lost it. It was seriously like a kid's toy. Bubbles everywhere. The ambulance didn't even smell like vomit. It smelled like Tide Springtime Fresh. I have never really laughed at people in the back of the ambulance. Maybe a light chuckle here or there, but this time I couldn't help it. I full on belly laughed about a third of the way to the hospital. She survived and I've taken her in on various psych issues since then, but she will always be Tide Springtime Fresh to me. I wanted to stop reading this thread, but I felt like I needed to conclude with something that wasn't completely horrific. I would like to thank you for supplying. When I was on the FD, we had a call for a power line down at a cell tower up on a hill in the middle of nowhere. This was during a bad storm. Power company trucks were all tied up already when we got turned out. We get there and the power line for the cell tower is lying in the road. There is a number on the shack at the bottom of the antenna, so we call the number while trying to get a hold of someone from the cell tower, which is running on a generator and possibly still energizing the line that is laying the street. We realize the door to the shack is unlocked, so we're all standing inside it out of the rain. The assistant chief is on his phone talking to some guy about the antenna, and all of a sudden he goes pale white, like a ghost, then walks out the door into the rain and tells us all to get out. Turns out the guy on the phone had told him that whatever happens, don't go in the shack because it is infested with brown recluse spiders that are attracted by the warmth. Everyone was crapping bricks when they heard that. Sorry if I rambled. I'm well into a nice bottle of rye. Oh, there was a time in the winter when we were looking for body parts in a field after a bad accident. Trudging around in knee-deep snow, this old-timer steps on something round and hard and crunches it. He almost fainted. He thought he had stepped on someone's head. Turns out the field was an old pumpkin patch and it was a frozen pumpkin. My uncle was an EMT and fire captain for a while. He does some different training type stuff now, which means he doesn't go out on calls much anymore. Anyway, his weirdest story was about 2 guys who got killed by a farmer. His firehouse was on the border of a suburban farming community, so with there being a lot of land, people would go ride dirt bikes and motocross bikes. These 2 guys liked to jump some dirt piles or what have you on this one farmer property, and he didn't like it. He tried to get them to stop in various ways, but finally he had enough of it. He one day put up in a clearing open pathway a thing of high test fishing line or something like that between two trees. One of the guys on a motorcycle came through at head level and didn't get his head taken off, but the line seriously cut into his neck and he ultimately bled out and died. My uncle was the one who was called to the scene to try and save him, but he was pretty much dead when he got there. He says that call has always sort of bugged him because it was a younger kid, 20 something, and it was such a cruel way for the farmer to deal with his problem. My mom's cousin was riding a dirt bike through the woods one day and hit a barbed wire at neck level that decapitated him. I get told that story every time I even think of buying a bike. Went out on a wreck where these two out-of-state kids overcorrected, veered off the road, hit a dirt hill, and landed in a tree. Neither of them were seriously injured, but it sure was a sight to see a brand new Tundra stuck in a tree about 6 feet off the ground. For our friends outside the USA, 6 feet, 1.8 m. Yeehaw. A guy had accidentally hung himself in his garage. He literally had a contraption he had built that held him in a harness. One of his arms controlled a rope that was attached through a pulley system with corn cobber at the end. As he pulled the rope, the dildo did the job on his backside. The other arm controlled the same kind of pulley, but at the end was a noose that was tied around his neck. Needless to say, he pulled a little too tight on the noose end. It was a nice normal neighborhood and the guy was married with kids with a seemingly completely normal life. If autoerotic asphyxiation is wrong, I don't want to be. Old, Zlkchzik 7 Zito JNMV. I came to an unconscious unresponsive young male in a bathroom. Massive bleeding. Turns out he was getting frisky. A plunger and his feet slipped out underneath him and it just ripped his hollow and solid organs apart. He was obviously DOA. Another was an old lady whom hadn't been seen outside her apartment for quite some time and wasn't answering the door. We knew she had died as we could smell her from outside. The fire department knocked down her door. I told the firefighter to go in and he was like, no way, it would be an emergency, fully knowing that she was almost 100% dead. Lights were all turned off and it was 2 AM, so each room I had to flip the switch. There were bloody paw prints all over the place, and in the bathroom, the toilet seat had been flipped up and there were bloody paw prints all around it as well. When I flipped the bathroom light, I was pretty sure what I would see, but it was worse than I had expected. The cats had started to eat her after she had died. I was 19 at that time. It seems I have scrolled too far down the comments. TT. We responded to a call where a mid-50 something year old semi-frail looking male bit his early 20-year-old something son, who probably outweighed the father by about 150 pounds or so, about 25 times all over his body, everywhere, arms, neck, torso, legs. It was ridiculous. They were deep marks too, like he was trying to rip skin away. Apparently they got into an altercation over who knows what, and the wife mother had to break it up by threatening them both with a large kitchen knife which the police confiscated. But the kicker was, there were no drugs or alcohol involved. Another was when we responded to a child who fell and hit his head on a tire that was sitting in their yard. Why it was there, I have no clue. But anyways, I went to check his pupils when I noticed one was completely fricked up. It looked almost like a tiny cat's eye. I almost flipped an absolute crap because this kid seemed perfectly fine, vitals good, talking to us properly, but the size of his pupil when compared to the other indicated moderate to severe head trauma, plus the whole abnormal pupil shape which I've never seen before. Well, after I flipped a crap to myself, I asked the mother. It turns out he was stabbed in the eye by his sister with a pencil when he was younger. This, my friend, is why you must always get a good patient history. My mother, who was a case manager for a while, had two interesting stories. A homeless woman who was a paranoid schizophrenic came into my mother's office with a severe infection in her foot. When my mother asks her if she thinks she's ready to be discharged, she proceeds to tell my mom that she did not have an infection in her foot but that she was turning into a pterodactyl. And the other is that another man who had schizophrenia explained to my mother that the voices in his head told him to cut off his dong and feed it to his dog, and he did. Okay, I'm an EMT. One of my teachers told me once about the craziest call he's ever received. He's sitting at the station and he gets a call for a lacerated finger. They arrive at the house and sure enough, a woman is sitting at the table with an extremely bloody finger. They patch up the wound and head out the door, and before they get on the truck, The woman taps him on the shoulder and says, "That's not really why I called you." And he says, "Well, what's the issue, Mom?" And she responded with, "I crap you not. I have razor blades in my tea." Apparently this woman had a sleeping disorder, in which she would sleepwalk and put crap in her tea and butt. Well, I suppose that's a fairly decent contraceptive. I'm a volunteer EMT. A chubby lady in her 30s made a 911 for severe abdominal pain. It's 2 in the morning, so I just woke up, tired and drowsy. As my partner and I get to her house, the husband is there at the door and tells us it's no big deal. We walk inside and find the woman laying on the floor on newspapers surrounded by cats. Must have been 4 or 5 cats laying next to her, licking her tea. Yes, the woman was giving birth. She did not know she was pregnant. We saw the little baby being delivered next to cats. Even worse, they had their 4-year-old boy stand next to her as he watched his mother give birth in pain. The little boy was crying. The cats were still licking her. The husband was standing there like it was no big deal. We had to call our county back and update them about the situation. They sent paramedics to assist. The cops showed up before we even got there. Told us it was ugly. They were right. When I was still doing clinicals for my EMTB cert, I had a ride along with a company that serviced rural areas. The first call we went to was a woman with chest pains. We pulled up to a house that looked like it was made with toothpicks and styrofoam. It was a dilapidated shanty in the middle of the woods. Cue the drop of my stomach knowing this is going to be a weird one. We walk in and the floor is dirt. Not covered in dirt, actual dirt. There was a burn barrel in the corner, no electricity, and a dingy mattress on the floor covered in tattered blankets. The PT looked rather weary while I was checking her vitals and I could see the shame in her eyes. We put her in the back of the truck for transport. I gave her some nitro and tried to talk with her a bit. It was a really sad and strange thing, and it still sticks out in my mind 7 years later. Of course, we had a looped out drug user later in the day that was weird too, but only because I've never seen someone enjoy drinking activated charcoal that much. We were dispatched to an elderly couple's residence, with a woman calling in to report that her husband had fallen in the shower. Groans from myself and my partner as we bantered about who would have to deal with the soggy old man parts should anything be wrong down there. We reach the residence and are led upstairs to the shower, where we find a perfectly alert older man sitting down on one of those handicapped fold-out shower seats. The shortened conversation goes like this. "Hello sir, I'm John and this is Smith. We're paramedics and are here to help. How about we give you a hand and help you stand up?" "I can't stand up." "Yeah, we know. That's why your wife called. If you let us take your arms, we can help lift you up." "No son, you don't understand. I can't stand up. Take a look at the seat and you'll see what I mean." The construction of this particular shower seat was several wooden slats arranged horizontally, with the attachment points of hinges that could swivel just slightly. When the poor guy fell backwards in the shower, he plopped down with such force that the slats opened side to side, allowing just enough space for his nutsack to squeak through, after which the slats promptly snapped back into place, firmly binding him to the chair. We tried to open the slats again, but that only succeeded in applying pressure on things which obviously did not want to be pulled on at that moment. Eventually we called for an engine company, who extricated the poor guy by cutting off the entire seat, which is how he was transported. Never did get to find out how things ended up for him. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.